David, let's talk about Georgia. We are very close to the Middle East region. Let's talk about Georgia's vulnerability and the threats and challenges we're facing, and the influence of the situation in the Middle East in our country, in our region, including the North Caucasus.
Thanks. First of all, as you very correctly mentioned, we are located in a very volatile region, and considering this, the ISIL ability of influencing the youngsters and attracting them as foreign fighters will be a major issue for all neighboring states. Because that's also, let's say, time-tested strategy of bringing foreign fighters, and then when the war is over, they are usually going back. We have seen the same situation in the past. We have seen the same situation already back in the 1980s, when, according to some scholars, the so-called Islamist International was born. Before then, it was like different groups working and organizing in different regions, and then all of a sudden it became a global phenomenon already in the 1980s. Right now we have actually much more acute problem because of the internet use and because of the more ability for people to travel from and to this region. So that's one of the main issues every neighboring states, special forces and law enforcement agencies should really very carefully take into consideration. I'll also make a small comment about the issue of whether it's humanitarian issues versus security issues. On the one hand, when we're dealing with a large influx of refugees, of course there is always a threat of many terrorist fighters actually camouflaged or kind of are able to enter those territories. But at the same time, the terrorist organizations have both the experience have both the experience and expertise to bring in their people, their fighters into the designated states. And plus, they also have this time-tested strategy of specifically trying to attract those people who are more able to organize terrorist attacks in different states. So first and foremost, I would say the European states themselves should also very carefully and very closely work with their own population. I mean those disenchanted youth that are the primary targets of the Islamic State recruitment, and not those people, let's say, who are coming from Syria. That's also an old strategy that was used by Hezbollah or Hamas fighters. They tried to attract people with Western passports who were able to enter Israel without much less problems than, let's say, people from Arabic states. So we need to work on different levels, both, as was already mentioned by my colleagues, both states should work and different scholars should work, Islamist theologians should also work, and those who are opinion makers in those societies to make sure that young people do not fall under this unfortunately very popular and very efficient, let's say, quote-unquote spell of the Islamic State organization. For neighboring states like us, it's especially an urgent issue because we are also from the North Caucasus, are bordering another volatile region, and we have seen actually how the Islamic State tries to expand its presence in many regions which were hitherto unrelated to those regions and were not influenced by the Islamic State. Right now, due to the, as I was already mentioning, due to the battlefield successes of the Islamic State, it tries to become the leader of, if not the whole, but at least very big part of large Sunni Islamist radicalist organizations, trying to work as its spearhead, and in many regions some organizations are already claiming allegiance to this organization, which in the case of North Caucasus will be problematic for our country too, because we are closely bordering this region. At the same time, as I was mentioning earlier, I think that the Islamic State, even though it will definitely make major attacks on nearby states, especially as was manifested by their attacks in Turkey. I still think they will focus on internal issues, and this is the element in which there's a big difference between organizations like Al-Qaeda on the one hand and organizations like Islamic State on the other. When we are discussing the so-called how to choose and what to choose during this major dilemma of far enemy versus near enemy. In the Al-Qaeda case, it was a far enemy. They tried to focus predominantly on foreign targets, first and foremost on the West, United States and Europe, and their allies like Turkey and Israel. And in the ISIS case, I think even though they will for sure stage major attacks against the countries who are right now carrying out military operations against them, they will still try to focus their efforts and their resources on the so-called near enemy, or the local governments, because even large terrorist organizations like ISIL, they don't have indefinite resources, so they should make priorities to which enemy to attack first and where to focus their priorities. All this being said, we need first and foremost very active coordination between and among those affected states, certain relevant authorities, all the law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies, because in many cases, and we have seen the unfortunate events in the past when either intelligence was not shared with neighboring states, or it was insufficient, or it was untimely, and some kind of special coordinating mechanisms definitely need to be in place to make sure that major attacks do not happen. That's much more easier, let's say, for terrorist organizations, because they have different methods. They have, let's say, less bureaucracy. In the case of their neighboring states, it's hard to coordinate, but at least there has to be some kind of mechanism which allows to share information. Otherwise, as all terrorist organizations do, they will try to find the weak spots against the enemy states they are targeting, and they will stage their attacks accordingly. For sure, it will be impossible to avoid and prevent all kinds of terrorist attacks, but at least it will be possible to make sure that all certain instruments are in place, and definitely it's not just work of states. It has to be also on societal level to involve all the opinion makers who have at least some kind of influence on, especially those who are still undecided. And that's the last point I will make. When dealing with terrorist organizations, we have like those who support like 1% or 5% of the population, and we have large part of population which is undecided, and who are the primary targets of those terrorist organizations' recruitment and propaganda efforts. Therefore, there's always this battle for hearts and minds between states and terrorist organizations, whose propaganda will ultimately prevail. So we have to really make sure that all steps are taken and all opinion makers are involved to make sure that undecided people do not become more members of terrorist organizations. Thanks.